Hi, this is Nicole Rivera, and you're listening to the Stop Writing Alone podcast. Earlier this week, in one of the writing community conversations that I was in, one writer was giving another newer writer the advice of getting an idea notebook, getting the notebook together where you just write down all of your ideas, brainstorm around this one sort of big topic that you're interested in, gather it all up so you don't forget it. Like in this moment of inspiration, get it down. And I was like, yes, excellent advice. I love the idea notebook. And then it hit me, wait a second, I don't have a current idea notebook. Then the internal conversation begins. Well, no, Nicole, don't worry about it. You don't need an idea notebook now because you have your ideas in this notebook and those ideas in this other notebook. And then I started to realize that I have all these various categories of notebooks in my collection. And I was sort of mind blown, not realizing that I had this mental categorization of notebooks within this massive collection that looks like, well, Nicole's got a lot of notebooks. What's going on? So I wanted to just run through the different types of notebooks that I use, how I use them, and why I use them. Because this is something that has just made an internal sense to me all along. And I don't know if everybody's sort of going at it in the same way. And so just in case you are feeling like overwhelmed with your notebooks, or maybe you have a great big notebook collection and you're just not using them because they're too precious and you don't want that. I was that person for a really long time. I would buy really beautiful notebooks and never kind of have the right idea to use for that particular notebook. And actually, I'm fairly certain I've mentioned this before in the podcast. When I was younger in high school and college, I would only write in my notebooks in a fountain pen in the neatest handwriting I could possibly muster. So I would write all of my stuff, poems, stories, what have you, on scraps of paper, whatever I could find. And only when I felt like it was worthy of a notebook would I then pull out my Mont Blanc fountain pen, which was a gift pretty much from my parents for my 12th birthday, and use that to write in notebooks. But I've since changed. I use all my notebooks. I wreck all my notebooks. I let the outsides be nice if they need to be, and the insides are a hot mess. But I sat here writing down in one of my notebooks, which we'll get to which type of notebook that is. I wrote down the various categories of notebooks that I have, and I think I covered them all. First is the idea notebook, which spurred this whole internal conversation and now episode. The themed notebooks, the soon-to-be textbooks notebooks, the nonstop notebooks, which is a category of its own, which has within it storybooks and workbooks. So what are all of these notebooks? Because everybody says every writer needs to have their writer's notebook. And I actually didn't even write that one down. My writer's notebook that's in my bag. We'll get to that. That's the one I think everybody is always talking about, the writer's notebook that you're always carrying with you in case something hits you. You jot stuff down, or you specifically go to a place, as Natalie Goldberg often recommends, like go to a place and just write down 30 things that you're observing in that time. That's writer's notebook stuff. So that I have a tiny sort of I don't want to say it's a wallet size notebook, one of those really tiny moleskin notebooks in my pocketbook. And you can use your phone for that kind of stuff too. That wasn't on my list. The idea notebook, which I actually have now convinced myself I do need a brand new idea notebook. For me, is a notebook that always has a unique cover. So it's a notebook that doesn't look like any other notebook I have. One of my first very effective idea notebooks was one of these quote unquote cool notebooks that I purchased and felt like I could never use until one day I started using it for this, jotting down my ideas, and it became the most precious thing. And I was like, wow. So it has a unique cover, but it's a mess inside. Absolute hot mess. The first one that I had was a clear cover with a happy face on it, and all the pages were yellow. So it looked like a yellow happy face, just because that first page. So I didn't use the first page, so the cover would still look like a yellow happy face. But then within, it just, for me, holds lists and lists and lists of ideas. So that first idea notebook, as an example, was when I was blogging. So I would have lists of blog post ideas, either thematic, non-thematic, just ideas of things that I wanted to write, people I wanted to interview or reach out to, ideas for what my blog could be or what I could do with it. And then when I started writing for other blogs, I would have pages that were devoted to those particular blogs and their themes and what I could write about them. Anytime one of those blogging challenges came around, like the A to Z, blogging from A to Z, I would have a page that had A through Z on it, and I would fill in the blanks of what were the things that I could write that year from A to Z. And as I got to writing more fiction, idea notebooks then became lists of ideas for stories. So sometimes based on things that happen to me, jotting down like, either a funny or a sad or a poignant thing that happened to me at some point in my life that'd be like, that's a cool thing that can happen to a character, or maybe that's even something that I want to write as a personal essay or a memoir type piece. But just lists. Sometimes I'll expand upon the list if I feel like this weird idea came to me that I never thought of before, and it's new, and I feel like I need to jot down the details because I might not know what the little bullet point means. But yeah, not neat. Because especially if I'm thinking of that notebook, that was a weird notebook that had no lines on it. I'm not normally a no-line person, but for this one, I went absolutely nuts. And I'm needing one now. I realize as I went through this whole thinking about this, why I don't have one, and that'll come up in a moment. But I think it's always important to have this one space that you feel free to be messy on the page with not fully realized ideas, with things that don't have legs yet, that you could go back and look at them and laugh at like 70% of them and be like, that was ridiculous. Who would ever do that, read that, want that? But it doesn't matter. Like, that becomes a safe space, but also it becomes a reference notebook that you take off the shelf when you aren't feeling necessarily inspired or not knowing what you want to do next, especially if you're in a position like I am here with the podcast and the YouTube and the Substack and everything, where you've got a lot of output going, you need a lot of content. Having these notebooks, and again, that started when I was blogging every day, right? So it was such a wonderful thing to have, to just sort of flip through and say, oh yeah, you know what? I don't want to write that one today, but that is a good one to keep in my mind. And just sort of getting back into the mindset of ideating sometimes just triggers other ideas, even if you don't use the reference to write from. This goes back to what I was talking about in last week's episode about the muse finding me when I'm working. So sometimes if I'm feeling completely blocked and don't even can't get my hand moving, an idea notebook is a place to go where my mind starts thinking about that time when I was, like I said, ideating, brainstorming, thinking about things, and then the muse and I can chat about something that comes up next. So an idea notebook is a must-have, and for whatever reason, for me, It just has to have a cool cover. So right now I have to go through my notebooks, see if I have something that fits the bill. If not, it might be a treat yourself moment to get a cool new notebook for ideas. And with that idea of these cool covers comes the next topic or category of notebook that I have, which is themed notebooks. I don't think I went into this intentionally at all, but I love the bargain section of Barnes & Noble, specifically for in my store on the end cap. They always have those package of 3 paperback notebooks. The company's usually Piccadilly notebooks, but I know they've done other ones too, but it's 3 notebooks in a pack that all have like a similar theme cover. So I know I got one pack of 3 that was like that Japanese wood art, one cover was the one with the famous painting with the wave, who's the artist's name I should know by now, but of course it's failed me. But the 3 different notebooks are in that same theme. I've got another package that like all 3 notebooks were bookshelves, all books on bookshelves. The most recent one I got was 3 different notebooks with sort of space themes. One was just stars and galaxies, and one was a celestial sort of design. I don't remember what the third one was, but they were all, it's clear to me when I look at them that they belong together. So I would buy them because it was a cheap, good sized notebook there. I think they call it the A5, that size. Not too big, not too small. I usually can fit them in my bag wherever I'm going. And then, when I have just one, they're not that heavy, so I don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. And they're lined, going back to what is my preferred method of writing, they're lined notebooks. And what I end up using them for are, and this just keeps happening, conventions and courses. So if I go to a convention, let's say back in the day when I would go to BookCon or BEA, when I go to New York Comic Con, when I go to any convention where there's going to be panels where I'm going to be learning and jotting things down, I will use one of those notebooks. And then, and this is where the unintentional sort of happen, it's like once I use one, if I use one for, let's say, New York Comic Con, and I will fill notebooks in a single convention. If I need the next one, I'll go to the next one in the same theme. If I don't need the next one, I'll typically save it for the next Comic-Con, so that it's like, okay, so that theme is Comic-Con. And I know that when I need to refer back to it, I'm looking for that theme book. That's when I went to that convention. Those were the books that I was carrying around. When it comes to courses, it's the same thing. For example, just now that the constellation space themed notebooks are what I used with the Natalie Goldberg course that I just took for the Writing Down the Bones. And I went through, I think I'm at 1.5 notebooks. I'm signed up for Natalie's class in July this month, and like next week I think it's going to be, and I'm just going to continue on the notebooks. Now I know those space theme notebooks are all my Natalie stuff. The book covers, the bookshelf notebooks, that group of theme notebooks I use for Tammy Brightweiser's flash fiction course that I did, and I wrote my flash fiction pieces in there, but I also took notes in there, and I know that when I'm doing anything that's sort of flash related, whether I go back to Tammy's course or I take something else in flash, I will go to that. I think I'm up to the second notebook in that set and continue it. And this is just, I think I'm just a very visual learner, and these things sort of file their way in my brain whether I want to or not. And what happens with these books, sometimes, depending on the course, the convention, the panels, or what have you, is that they all have the potential. And I should say I do, well, I guess I mentioned it with the Natalie Goldberg and Tammy. I do this with all of my online courses that I take. I have these books. But some of them actually fit into the next category, the soon-to-be textbooks. And I've mentioned it. These books, these notebooks, become my own textbooks. Sometimes those themed books become a textbook. And then there's some courses that I take that I just know. Taking this course, every single note I take is going to be that important that this notebook is going to be a textbook for me. And a perfect example of this is when I took the Everyone Can Podcast course with Kathy Heller. I got a large 8.5 by 11 notebook with a hard cover, very weird cover, not normally my style, some weird plaid cover. It was like purple and blue, but looks like nothing else on my shelf. And that I knew was going to be a huge reference book for me. And that usually happens when I'm taking a course, like the podcast course, filled with skills that I'm going to need to refer back to, that I'm just learning for the first time. And so then the pages become filled with how-tos and references to either other places I can look for extra help, or lists of things that I'll need to do, whatever it is I'm learning, names of people that I'm going to need to connect with, or what have you. So that's the category of soon-to-be textbooks. So if I were taking a course, like a in-depth course on, let's say, some sort of story structure, right? Oh my gosh, the name is failing me. My goodness. Save the Cat writes a novel, right? Jessica Brody has all these different courses that she offers that goes through her technique of writing a novel by following the 15 beats that Blake Snyder came up with for screenplay. That feels like a very skill-based course that I will be taking notes, that I will definitely be coming back to and referencing. That would be a soon-to-be textbook notebook for me. Is this insane? This might be insane. So those come around when I'm getting into a course that's very skill-based. See, that's different than, let's say, Natalie Goldberg's course, which is I'm definitely having this whole experience and learning about the writing practice. But the writing practice is something that can be explained in, 5 to 10 minutes. Like, I get it. I get what it is. Now I just have to practice it. Those notebooks are for practice. Whereas the podcasting is stuff that it's like, well, how do I podcast? Sit down, get comfortable. You're going to need tools. You're going to need skills. You're going to need all these different things. Same thing with the 15 beats. All right, sit down, get comfortable. Here's the 15 beats. Let me explain each one to you in depth. Those are things that I really need a big old notebook that I know I'm going to need to look back at. It's just not going to stick on the first go. Maybe that makes sense to you. I hope it makes sense to you, because somewhere in the back of my mind, it makes perfect sense to me. Okay, but the last category of notebooks, these nonstop notebooks, are notebooks that I'm using all the time, hence the nonstop notebooks. And there's two subcategories of nonstop notebooks. There's my storybooks, and then there's my workbooks. And both of those things have names like outside. My storybooks are not the same storybooks that my son reads. They are the books where I write my stories. But specifically, I have then two kind of types of storybooks that I use. This is so weird. I didn't even realize all this was going on in my brain. No wonder I get so overwhelmed by simple stuff. My brain is trying to keep all this straight. So within my storybooks, there are writing prompt books, and then there are long story books. Writing prompt books, I love, and they almost always have a blank cover on them, and I don't know why that is. I don't know what my plan is, if later I'm going to do something else with the cover. I still don't think I've done that. I have never written on the cover and said, all right, whatever. I'm getting off on a tangent. Anyway, my writing prompt books are notebooks that I bring to every single writing prompt party, and I just keep using the notebook over and over again until I finish it. But other things that are sort of permitted in these books, because clearly I have some unwritten rules about my notebooks, are whenever I write a story for Sprinkled Inspiration for Heather Huffman's Substack. She does the daily prompts. And sometimes I will sit down and write a daily prompt, and I'll do it in that notebook. But even when I've been doing the monthly audio stories that she's been, she shares a prompt each month and asks us to call in with our story by the end of the month. I've been writing those stories in there. The 24-hour story that I participated in, I did my drafts in this notebook. So there's something about this one type of book that it's like, I know when I sit with this notebook, I am writing to a prompt. Even if I'm outside my YouTube prompts, doing those prompts for myself, the 52 stories in 52 weeks, those go in there. And so I have a pack of these plain, right now, this is the one pack that I'm going through that I got from Costco. Are they? I don't know if they're moleskin. They might be moleskin. They look like cardboard. They're just plain tan covers. And I got a pack of 6 from Costco. And I'm on my second or third of those books since I started them. And I think I just bought those this year. That is only stories. Oh, I didn't have this when I was brainstorming, but I do when we're in writing prompt parties, any notes that I jot down from listening to other people's stories. Because when we do a writing prompt party and people read aloud, I'll jot down cool sentences or characters or something that they shared in their story. So when they're done talking, I could be like, when you said this, oh my M. That's oh my G. OMG. I can't. I'm so excited. I can't even say it. But those little notes are in there, but that's it. The date, the prompt, the story. And if it's a writing prompt party, you might see little notes from my reactions to stories. But that's the only thing that's really sort of allowed. So strange with my rules. Now, if a story needs more than that, in other words, if I'm finding myself delving into a story that now requires research, or I'm brainstorming about different ways the story can go, or characters, or all of a sudden, if a story starts needing anything beyond me just writing the story, then it's a big day for the story. It gets its own notebook. These are the long story notebooks that are usually for novels, novellas, that type of thing. And that kind of notebook, and I think many people have something like this. If you're working on a novel, you've got a space, I'm sure, where you're collecting all of the excess. There's a word for that that's escaping me right now. The marginalia, all the marginalia from your book. Is that the right word? I think that's the word I wanted. But it becomes kind of my brain space, extra brain space for the larger piece. If I have any sort of ideas for a plot outline, that'll be in that notebook, little bullet points. I'm not really a plotter per se, but there are times that I have ideas of where things want to go. That goes in that notebook. If I have any kind of timeline, that'll go in the notebook. Character name stuff, I'm always toying with names. And then if I get a larger cast, I'll be jotting down the names and who they are, little footnotes so that I remember. If there's any backstory for the characters that's relevant to me as the author or to the plot, that all of that information will be there. Any brainstorms at all that I have about the book, any research or anything. It's kind of like the idea notebook, but focused on this one thing. It's all the ideas for this one story, and all in one place. So that's a different kind of storybook, and it doesn't happen often. I think maybe once or twice a story that started in the writing prompt book ended up earning itself a notebook. But for the most part, I kind of have an idea when I start a story, whether or not it's something that's going to be like contained within my regular writing prompt, write short story book, or if it's going to be something that needs essentially more space and needs a notebook of its own. So those are my storybooks. My workbooks is like the thing that I was just using today. This sort of developed with the podcast and then with the Happy Campers. That workbooks started to, it's this whole new category of notebook got developed. So it originally started with the podcast that every time I was doing an episode, I had this one notebook that I would write the name of the episode on the top of the page, and then just bullet points of either of things that I wanted to say, or if I was interviewing somebody, the questions that I wanted to ask, little, background about the person that I was going to talk to, little bullet points of things that they did or books that they wrote or, that I wanted to make sure I mentioned or had on my mind during the interview. And then also, that becomes sort of my outline for the show notes of the episode. Like those are the things I also want to make sure I have links to when I create the show notes later on. The interview pages become like there's a before and an after. There's the before with the questions and all of those bullet points. And then after is where I will write down any links that maybe the person might have mentioned during the episode or, really that's it. Sometimes if I'm really paying attention, I might have like a timestamp on it. Like, oh, they said this thing here and I want to make sure I go, I go back to that or what have you, but I haven't done that in a while. The workbook also, I should say that's when it started, like just the episodes one after another. Then when I started Happy Campers, I had a separate notebook for Happy Campers, but now it just became all merged into the same thing. My episode notebook became my Happy Campers, and my meetings notebook for my workbooks are all things Stop Writing Alone. So if we have a meeting in Stop Writing Alone, a goal setting meeting or just a casual chat meeting, even our critique meetings, like any notes that I take in any of these meetings, except for writing prompt parties, all go into the workbook. And then the cool thing that happens is that the workbook becomes like this chronological document of all of the writing themed conversations that I've had within the Stop Writing Alone community, whether it's on the podcast here or in the meetings in Happy Campers. Everything's all in this one book. And then as I started doing the YouTube channel more and more, those episode notes also started to come into this notebook. So it really is like, I guess the workbooks for me are the Stop Writing Alone books, that they just now have become a weekly documentation of all the ways that I've showed up for Stop Writing Alone, except for the writing prompt parties all together, because the writing prompt party stuff, like I said, is all in the writing prompt book. And then that's kind of cool because that becomes like a chronological document of all of the stories that have sort of developed within community. So it's kind of fun. So yeah, I'm thinking that there are other notebook categories that maybe I didn't have down here, just like that, the writer's notebook. There was something else that came to me while I was talking, and I said, don't get distracted. Keep going. Well, I mean, in the themed notebooks, I also have themed notebooks that go along with books that I'm reading. I don't know. This already seems insane to me as I'm saying it out loud, and I'm wondering if you have separate categories of notebooks or if you just have like your now notebook. Because I feel like the closest thing to a now notebook is my workbooks, where I'm opening this notebook. Right now it's a yellow hardcover notebook that my brother gave to me for my birthday. It was bullet journal. So again, it's weird because it doesn't have lines or anything. The pages could be blank because the bullets inside are yellow. And my eyes don't see that. But but it's okay because this book can be a mess as I go through it. No one's going to see it but me. Is that how you do all of your stuff? Do you just have one notebook that you open up to the next page and now you're writing a story, and then the next page is notes from a meeting you went to? That seems strange to me, but maybe that's just my own sort of notebook OCD kicking in. So idea notebooks, themed notebooks, so that I can figure out who they belong to and what part of my brain they belong to. The textbooks, the soon-to-be textbook notebooks, and then my storybooks and workbooks, which are the most used, I would say, aside from that little writer's notebook in my pocketbook. Yeah, there was one that came to me, and now I can't even remember what it was. And that's it. Notebooks. Do I have a problem? Yes. What do I do with my notebooks when I'm done with them? I saw that topic come up somewhere, and I was like, what? Oh, I know which other notebook came up, and this is related to this. My morning pages notebooks. So that's when I started buying those themed notebooks, those little A5 discount notebooks in Barnes & Noble. I was using them for morning pages. Those notebooks typically for me end up getting stickers all over the outside of them because I give myself a sticker every day I do morning pages. And yeah, but now those themed notebooks have started to become other things. So if I have one of those themed notebooks with stickers all over them, that's morning pages, which I did a whole episode on morning pages, so I won't bore you with the details of that. You can go back and check that. And then if they're not stickered, then the cover means something to me internally. There's definitely more notebooks. I'm discovering this now. I'm sure of it. But yeah, one of the questions that often comes up with notebooks is, what do you do with them? What do you do with your notebooks before and after? So now I've told you what I actually do with my notebooks after I've purchased them. They have categories of insanity that get split up. But what do I do with them when I'm finished with them? Well, as I mentioned, many of these books become reference books on my shelf. The course books have a potential. The themed notebooks always have a potential to be reference materials for me, but those soon-to-be textbooks, those guys are absolute references. They go on a shelf. This way I can find them because, again, the example of my notebook from my podcasting course. I'm showing up to this podcast every week. I know what my routine is for recording and producing a podcast. That's fine. But people often ask me questions about how to do X, Y, or Z in a podcast that I may or may not still be doing, but I know I have notes on in my notebook. So I still pull that notebook off the shelf, often to give somebody else a reference. So those notebooks end up on my shelf. My story notebooks and my workbooks, I have two baskets in my closet behind me. One is of notebooks that are blank, still to be used, and the other is notebooks that have been used that maybe aren't like constant references. Most of my used workbooks and my used storybooks end up there. The storybooks have been coming down more often now that I have my Story Hoarder Substack, because I have been taking stories from there to put onto the Story Hoarder page. So now I actually need them so I can transcribe the stories. So, I mean, notice this is no good. I've now mentioned 3 different types of notebooks that are not getting thrown away. I do have a problem. I have not yet gotten comfortable with throwing away my used notebooks. So I do have this basket that's getting heavier, and I do have to come up with some technique. Morning pages, I actually have a large manila envelope that my morning pages notebooks have gone into. And I sort of close it because I still don't necessarily feel comfortable going through all of them yet. But I keep telling myself maybe I will want to. But yeah, those I'm actually getting closer to saying I don't need to go back to it. Let me just check them. But maybe do a quick, see, here I go again. Maybe do a quick run through before I do that to see if there was any creative sparks in there that need to go into an idea notebook. Idea notebooks can't go anywhere until I've either used all those ideas or, as in the case of the blogging idea notebook, that cool happy face notebook I had, I don't have that blog anymore. And I'm not blogging for any of those spaces that I was blogging for anymore. So I actually did get rid of that notebook. But I did go through it to make sure that none of those ideas apply to what I wanted to do now. Other idea notebooks that I've had since are still hanging out in my used notebook basket, and I still pull them out and check to see, like, is that something that I want to bring to either the podcast, the YouTube, just to the community in general when we're having meetings. So yeah, it's a problem. It's a problem in terms of not getting rid of the notebooks. So maybe my system is not the best if you're going minimalist, but I just wanted to share with you what I'm doing. And if you have some cool ideas, how to sort of organize your notebooks, or how you're using your notebooks, or how you're getting rid of your notebooks, I'd like to hear that. Please let us know. Come on over if you're listening to this podcast in the Stop Writing Alone Substack. You can put your comments right on the page right there. That's stopwritingalone.substack.com. It's one of the great things that I love about that space is exactly that. When you listen to the podcast, you can reply or question or just interact with the post itself, and I will get that email right away and be able to write on back to you. Other things that are going on in the Substack community is the VIP section has opened. That's the very invested paid subscribers for $5 a month or $50 for the whole year. And we have already had our first goal setting posts go up. We had 2 write-ins earlier this week, and the story club has officially kicked off with this month's first lesson, which is the lesson is called Drop the Hammer, and we are going to be looking at Hamlet this month by William Shakespeare. So the first post went out on that, but even if you join now, all of it will be available on the page for you so that you can see and catch up with us and see what's going on. Otherwise, we do have a write-in coming in later on this month for everybody that is subscribed to the Stop Writing Alone Substack, whether you're paid or not. And yeah, more to come as the month and the year goes on. But yeah, I hope to see you out there or in the Stop Writing Alone network, which is through Mighty Networks. All the links for all of this will be in the show notes right at wherever you're listening to this podcast. This way you can connect with the community and stop writing alone today. So thank you as always for listening. Happy writing, and I will talk to you next week.